Captain Zethkar of the Galactic Defense Corps reviewed the application with barely concealed disgust. The holographic display showed a young human female, her primitive biped form standing at attention in the standardized military pose. Her species designation read Terran, one of the newer additions to the galactic community, barely a century since first contact. Rejected, he growled, his four mandibles clicking dismissively. Physical parameters insufficient. Reaction time, substandard. Neural capacity limited to single-threaded processing. The human's name was Sarah Chen, and like thousands of her kind, she had applied for the prestigious pilot corps. The Zephyrians had dominated space combat for millennia with their superior reflexes and quantum-linked consciousness. The crystalline Vorthan could process battle data at incomprehensible speeds. Even the aquatic depths could manipulate gravity fields through pure thought. Humans? They were useful for manual labor, perhaps basic maintenance. But piloting the galaxy's most advanced warships? Laughable. 3 months later, when the Devourers emerged from dark space, the galaxy's laughter died in their throats. The enemy arrived without warning. A swarm of biomechanical horrors that consumed entire star systems, converting matter into more of themselves. Their ships moved like living things, adapting, evolving, learning from every encounter. The Galactic Defense Corps' finest pilots engaged them with textbook precision, following established protocols that had secured peace for 10,000 years. They were slaughtered. The Zephyrians' quantum-linked minds, so effective against predictable opponents, became a liability when the Devourers learned to inject viral thoughts into their network. Entire squadrons turned on each other, their pilots screaming as alien consciousness invaded their shared awareness. The Vorthon crystals cracked under the psychic pressure of creatures that existed partially outside normal space-time. Their perfect calculations meant nothing against enemies that rewrote the laws of physics with each adaptation. The depths found their gravity manipulation turned against them, as the Devourers learned to bend space itself, creating impossible geometries that drove the aquatic beings into catatonic madness. Within days, the core worlds were burning. Admiral Kothra stood in the command center of Citadel Station, watching the tactical display with growing desperation. Red indicators spread across the galaxy map like a plague. The assembled military leaders of a dozen species argued in multiple languages, their panic translating perfectly through the universal communicators. "We need something they haven't seen," the Admiral said, his scaled hide pale with exhaustion. "Something unpredictable." That's when Commander Torres, the human liaison officer, stepped forward. "Permission to speak, sir?" Kothra barely glanced at the primitive biped. "What could your species possibly contribute? Your people can't even achieve quantum consciousness." "Exactly," Torres replied. "That's why Sarah Chen is still alive." The room fell silent. On the tactical display, a single green dot moved through a debris field that had once been the Centauri Defense Fleet. IFF signals identified it as a modified human cargo hauler, the Defiant Dream. "Impossible," whispered Captain Zethkar. "That sector is swarming with Devourers. Nothing could survive there." But the green dot continued its impossible journey, weaving between massive bioships that should have detected and consumed it hours ago. As they watched, the cargo hauler's weapons, laughably primitive kinetic cannons that the Corps had rejected as obsolete, began systematically destroying Devourer scouts. "How?" Kothra demanded. Torres smiled grimly. "Because Sarah Chen, thinks like a human. While your people rely on quantum processing and psychic networks, she uses something the Devourers can't predict or adapt to: pure chaotic intuition. The bridge's communications array crackled to life. A human voice, strained but determined, filled the command center. "This is Sarah Chen aboard the Defiant Dream. I've been studying these things for 3 days, and I think I know how to hurt them." "Chen!" Admiral Kothra's voice carried a mixture of hope and desperation. "Report your status." "Currently using their own absorption field against them," Sarah replied, her words punctuated by weapons fire. "These bioships expect logical attack patterns, coordinated strikes, predictable behavior. But humans? We're gloriously, beautifully irrational." On the tactical display, the Defiant Dream suddenly accelerated directly toward a massive devourer vessel. Every military doctrine in the galaxy screamed that this was suicide, a frontal assault against a ship 50 times its size. The devourer vessel moved to intercept, its adaptive shields configuring for the expected attack pattern. But at the last second, Sarah did something no rational pilot would attempt. She shut down her engines completely and used the ship's artificial gravity to slingshot around a piece of debris, coming at the bioship from an angle that should have been impossible. Her kinetic rounds, fired not at the vessel itself but at specific points in the surrounding debris field, created a cascade of ricochets that struck the bioship's vulnerable neural clusters in a pattern too random for its adaptive systems to counter. The massive vessel convulsed and died. "Brilliant," Admiral Kothra whispered. "Absolutely brilliant madness." Over the following weeks, Sarah Chen became the galaxy's most unlikely hero. Her tactics made no sense to military computers or alien strategists. But they worked. She fought like no pilot in galactic history, sometimes retreating when victory seemed assured, attacking when defeat appeared certain, making decisions that contradicted every principle of warfare, yet somehow achieved the impossible. More importantly, she began training other humans in her methods. The pilot corps, desperate for any advantage, finally opened their ranks to human applicants. They discovered that what they had dismissed as limitations were actually humanity's greatest strengths. Single-threaded processing meant devourer mind viruses couldn't propagate through human consciousness. Substandard reaction times forced creative problem-solving rather than reflexive responses. Limited neural capacity encouraged intuitive leaps that transcended logical analysis. The galaxy had spent millennia perfecting the art of predictable warfare. Humans brought chaos theory to the battlefield, and chaos was exactly what the Devourers couldn't adapt to. When the final Devourer hive ship fell 6 months later, it was Sarah Chen who delivered the killing blow, a maneuver so impossibly reckless that 3 different species' tactical computers had classified it as physically impossible right up until the moment it worked. Captain Zethkar found himself standing before the same human female he had rejected months earlier. But now she wore the insignia of a Galactic Defense Corps admiral, the highest military honor their civilization could bestow. "Congratulations, Admiral Chen," he said, his mandibles clicking in what humans had learned to recognize as respect. "Though I confess I still don't understand how you do what you do." Sarah smiled, that peculiarly human expression that somehow conveyed both humility and fierce pride. "That's exactly why it works, Captain. The moment you can predict human behavior is the moment we've already lost what makes us dangerous." As she walked away, Zethkar reflected on the galaxy's new reality. They had been saved not by their greatest strengths, but by embracing what they had considered the greatest weakness of an inferior species. Humanity had taught them that sometimes the best way to win an impossible war was to be impossible, to understand. And in the darkness between stars, any devourer remnants that still existed had learned to fear one thing above all others: the sight of a human ship moving in patterns that made no sense, piloted by a species that had turned unpredictability into an art form. The galaxy's nightmare had become their salvation. The end.